We've been waiting years for the Nikon Z8, but it's here. That long wait is over, and it's selling well. In fact, it's selling very well worldwide. So well that it's topping the charts at not only high-end camera stores such as Yodobashi, Map Camera, and Fujiya Camera, but also Bic and Kitamura Camera. So stick around after this short break for all the details. But first, please do me a favor. Follow me on Twitter, but most importantly, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. It doesn't cost you anything and really does help this channel grow. Since the Nikon Z8 was announced on May the 10th, just, well, I guess a month ago now, the Nikon Z8 has been selling very, very well at B&H and Adorama here in the United States. And I can tell you this from firsthand experience because I cover the camera's announcement live, and I was shocked. By noon, I had over 55 pre-orders for this camera between B&H and Adorama. I'd never seen so many pre-orders before in my life, not for the R5, not for the R8, not for the R50. It's just, well, it's exceeded all expectations. But sadly, both B&H and Adorama don't release their sales figures on a regular basis. But over on the other side of the planet, over in Japan, the top 5 Japanese retailers of cameras do release their sales figures, and boy, does it look interesting. Let's go ahead and start off with Yodobashi Camera. Yodobashi Camera normally releases their top 10 camera sales every 2 weeks. They're the 4th largest camera retailer in Japan. And taking a look at the 5 top positions, the Nikon Z8 is sitting in first place. Pretty good, right? And the Nikon Z9, which has been out for about 2 years now, is sitting in 3rd place, doing really, really well. Now, we don't see Canon in this list. We don't see Panasonic or Fujifilm, but Sony is dominating once again with that Sony a7 IV in 2nd place and 4th place, so 1 body alone and 1 kit. And of course, the Sony a7 R5 is in a distant 5th place. And this camera was announced back in November. I wasn't sure what it was going to be. I thought maybe it might be similar to the Canon EOS R5, but basically Sony's gone in their own route. This is a high-end camera that's focused more on more megapixels rather than video. The video capabilities of the camera can do 8K, but at 24 and 25 frames per second with a 1.2 times crop. But can also do 61 megapixels. But the Nikon Z8, who's kidding who? It's a direct competitor to the Canon EOS R5, and less so for the, well, Sony a7 R5. Map Camera is another high-end Japanese retailer. Once again, we can see that the Nikon Z8 is in first place, followed in 2nd place by the Nikon Z9. It's almost as though, and you'll see this through the rest of the numbers, it's almost as though the Nikon Z8 is pulling up the sales figures for the Nikon Z9. It doesn't appear that the Nikon Z8 is in any way cannibalizing Nikon Z9 sales. Both cameras are doing well. And of course, in 3rd place, we have that Sony a7 IV. We also have the Canon EOS R6 Mark II. Surprised that it didn't show up in Yodobashi. And of course, in 5th place, we have the Fujifilm X-H2. So a little bit more of a diverse lineup at Map Camera. But again, the story here is Nikon Z8 is in first place. So let's see if it's in first place at our next camera retailer. Well, here at Fujiya Camera, Canon's certainly doing a whole lot better. We see the Canon EOS R6 Mark II. We see the Canon EOS R8 and the Canon EOS R7. But again, the real story here is how the Nikon Z8 is absolutely dominating in first place, but that Nikon Z9 once again is in 2nd place. So both cameras, Nikon is, since Nikon has released the Z8, the Nikon has been absolutely on fire. First place, 2nd place, the Nikon Z8, the Nikon Z9, these aren't cheap cameras. I mean, the Nikon Z8 costs about $4,000 and $1,500 more. We have the Nikon Z9, but the first 3 camera stores that I've talked about, including Fujiya Camera, Map Camera, and Yodobashi, they're what you would consider more high-end camera stores. So where's the Nikon Z8 as we start to look at some more affordable camera stores in Japan? Well, you might be surprised. Bic Camera is essentially a consumer electronics chain in Japan. They have over 41 stores, and what's really interesting is that Bic Camera has a 50% ownership in their rival camera store. Well, with 50% ownership, is it really a rival store? I'm not so sure about that. But anyhow, so let's get back to the standings. So once again, the Nikon Z8 is in first place. Bit of a trend, isn't it? First place at 4 camera stores in Japan. We have 1 more to go to. And one thing's a bit more interesting here at Bic Camera is we see a bit more of a diverse lineup. We've got the Sony vlogging camera, the E10. We've got the Panasonic DCG100V. We do have a Canon camera, and it's the EOS R10 with that kit lens, the 18-150. And if I was going to buy a kit lens for that camera, that's probably the one I'd go with. Although I still have fond memories. I got it over here, is the 18-135 USM. I really do like that lens. It was one of those lenses that was a kit lens that really punched above its weight. It was more of a mid-level quality lens. It wasn't just low end. It's a good lens. And in fifth place, of course, no surprises, we've got the Sony a7 IV. All right, we've got one more camera store to go to. Where's the Nikon Z8 going to be? Can you take a wild guess? Camera Kitamura has been around since 1934, so they know quite a bit about cameras. And no surprises, the Nikon Z8 once again is in first place. Now, we don't see the Nikon Z9 here, and we do see a rather diverse lineup from Canon, I believe Fuji, and Sony as well. So the story about this video is not how Canon, Sony, Panasonic, and Fujifilm are doing in the top 10, but how Nikon is absolutely dominating. The Nikon Z8 is in first place at all 5 camera stores, and we know it's doing very well over here in North America at Adorama and B&H. And I can also tell you that here in Canada, it's doing very well. I was talking to Downtown Camera, Patrick at Downtown Camera, who's my go-to sales guy for this camera. So if you're in Canada and you want to buy the Nikon Z8, talk to Patrick. He told me that he hasn't seen pre-order sales for any camera like this ever. I mean, the long list of pre-orders is absolutely stunning. It is doing well worldwide. The Nikon Z8, should it really be a surprise to us? I mean, after all, let's take a look at the Canon EOS R5, a camera that I'm shooting with right now. Talk to Z-Wade or Z-Wade, anybody else who is a Nikon shooter, a Canon or a Sony shooter, a Panasonic shooter, and anybody that understands photography and videography will tell you that the Canon EOS R5 is a solid camera. It does very well in stills, 20 frames per second, lossless RAW, has good dynamic range, low light performance, and video capabilities are pretty astonishing with 8K video, 24, 25, 30 frames per second, 20 frames per second lossless RAW at around 1.2 gigabytes per second. No problems. It's a solid camera, and I've shot over 1,000, over 1,100 videos with it, and it's absolutely astonishing. So when we take a look at the Nikon Z8, which looks to be in most of the capabilities that the R5 does, it's at least as good. It's better in some cases. And when you just for $39.99 that you get a camera that has a stacked sensor, a stacked BSI sensor that gives slightly better low light performance, that gives you better dynamic range, but also allows you to move a whole lot more data, a whole lot more quicker. That's very impressive. If you're sitting there thinking, come on, Simon, the R5 is still a better camera, I would challenge you to just take a look at the Nikon Z8. And yes, I understand there's been a recall, but let's not forget what happened with the Canon EOS R5 when it first came out. And yes, I will agree with you that the autofocus system is better in most scenarios, but there's other scenarios where the autofocus system on the Z8 is better, especially when you're dealing with subjects where there's so many different other humans around. The Nikon Z8 is a very solid camera, and in several places, such as that stack sensor, the video capabilities, well, the Nikon Z8 is slightly better, and I'm glad it is. I'm glad that the Nikon Z8 is a better camera, because what that means for us, if you're a Canon shooter, it means that, well, that R5 Mark II, which is supposed to be announced later this year, it means that Canon's taking notice. They see Nikon as a very serious camera company, not a consumer electronics company, and they take what they do seriously. I don't know if the Canon EOS R5 Mark II is going to have a stacked sensor or not, and perhaps if it's coming out this fall, that decision was made a long time ago whether it has a stacked sensor or not. But Canon, seeing what they've done, what Nikon's done with the Z8, this is good news for Canon customers, because I think that camera coming out is going to at least match the Z8 or beat it in many areas, because that's what happens in the camera world. You generally leapfrog each other. You come out with better cameras. But if you're a Sony owner and you're thinking like, yeah, you know what, Sony's got it beat. We've got more lenses on the E-mount. We've got a much greater variety of cameras. This is still good news, because with you see with the Nikon releasing the Z9, a very solid stills hybrid camera, a flagship camera, and then the Nikon Z8 basically copying most of those capabilities, with the exception, of course, of auto capture. And then the Canon EOS R5 doing what it can do, it can only make Sony want to, well, it's going to increase competition. And not just for Sony, but for Panasonic. We've yet to hear about the S1H Mark II. It was due to come out this spring, but I wonder, with the Nikon Z8, did that hold things off? Did that get Panasonic to go, wait a minute here, we've got a really good camera in the S1H Mark II, but we've got the Canon EOS R5 out there, and now Nikon's released the Z8 with better capabilities. Maybe we should take a little bit more time. And you see, that's the big news about this story here. Not that the Nikon Z8 is dominating, but that it's dominating with the capabilities it's got, that it's going to spur on competition with Canon, with Sony, with Panasonic, and maybe even Pentax. Although they're still shooting with DSLRs, aren't they? But this is the exciting thing here. And what really kind of surprised me most about the Nikon Z8 is not that it beats the Canon EOS R5 in many capabilities. That's not a surprise. After 3 years, I think, let's be honest with each other, that's kind of what we expect. But to be able to put a stacked sensor in a camera that costs just under $4,000, that is impressive. This is not a comparing one spec sheet to another. When you take a sensor and you make it stacked, that means it's also backside illuminated. There's so many benefits you get. As a backside illuminated sensor, it does improve low light performance, it does improve dynamic range. But when you stack it, now you get much greater performance. You can take a whole lot more data, push it through the camera a whole lot quicker. You can reduce things such as rolling shutter. It's pretty impressive to be able to do that. And just if Canon took the R5 and just put a stacked sensor in it, that alone, I think, would be worthy of a big upgrade for many people. A stacked sensor, 8K video at 60 frames per second. It's no wonder that the Nikon Z8 has sold really, really well. It's no surprise that it's going to continue to sell well. And I'm happy for Nikon. I'm happy for the customers of the Nikon Z8. And I covered a story just recently about how Nikon was recalling, or let's call it a recall. Nikon's not calling it a recall, but if you have a serial number, certain cameras have a problem where the lens just, well, I use my 70D here. What would happen is you try to attach a lens and it's just not turning. It won't lock into position. But from what I'm hearing is for anybody who has this issue, generally it's taking 1 to 3 days for a turnaround. And Nikon is offering free shipping. So if you're living in an area where you don't have access to a local camera store, you get free shipping, ship it off to Nikon, they'll send it back to you, they'll get it fixed, it's done pretty quickly. And I don't want to harp on that because, well, I remember when I got the Canon EOS R5, and probably you do too, the amount of press coverage, the amount of stories, it seemed to dominate the news cycle, not in a good way, but for the overheating. And the Canon EOS R5 at the time was primarily marketed as a stills camera. It was very capable as a stills camera. It wouldn't overheat in the stills capability modes. It was all about switching over to video. Canon did eventually fix that. Now they came out with firmware 1.1.1, which helped, and then finally with firmware 1.6 with auto temp off or auto temp off, something like that, set to high. Basically, you can record unlimited with 8K RAW and 4K HQ. 4K 60 and I believe 4K 120 would still overheat a bit, but in temperatures all the way up to about 96 degrees Fahrenheit or around 36, 37, 38 degrees Celsius, no problems. They got fixed. And here, Nikon very quickly identified the problem, issued a recall, and a lot of the people who've sent me comments saying, hey, I'm not having any issues, should I go ahead and send it in? And I said, you know what? You're not having any issues, great. Go ahead and send it in, because the last thing you want to be doing is you're out in the middle of Africa or someplace remote, no camera store, no cell phone, and you have this problem, you're on a shoot, get it fixed when you're not having the problem. But then we're going to be over and done with this, and we're going to continue to see more firmware updates for the Nikon Z8, keeping it current. It's an impressive camera, and if you're interested in purchasing it, it's no longer in pre-order status. I do have links down below for the Nikon Z8. You can purchase it at Adorama and B&H. If you're in Canada, I have links to Patrick at Downtown Camera. Whenever you see a price on their website, give Patrick a call, mention my name, and I can almost guarantee you, no matter what the product is, he's going to shave a little something off the price. However, if you're watching this as a Canon customer and you've been saying, you know what, I still want to stick with Canon. Yes, I agree, the Nikon Z8 is a terrific camera, but I've got a whole bunch of Canon glass. Well, you might want to take a look at the Canon EOS R5. If you held off purchasing the camera because of the price, we're seeing huge deals. Now, there are refurbs for $29.99, but I'm going to recommend against that because if you look at the sales at Adorama, for example, $33.99, and B&H has the same price as well, but you get a free battery grip. That's worth $350. So $33.99, and if you take the value of the battery grip, that drops the price to $3,049, just $50 more than the refurb, and you get a free battery grip. Don't need the battery grip? Well, then you can sell it on Kijiji or eBay, and I'm sure you can easily make back between $200 and $300. So the Canon EOS R5 is essentially $3,000. So I've got the links in my description down below. And if you want to stay up to date on the latest camera news and rumors, then please subscribe. It really does help this channel grow. It's strange. It's not like having 40,000 subscribers or 100,000 subscribers makes a huge difference. But whenever a video gets put out, it gets sent to all my subscribers first, and then if they watch it, I get a lot more people coming in. But the thing that really makes a difference is when companies like Canon, Nikon are looking at my channel and they see 41,000 subscribers, it makes a huge difference because when I covered that Nikon Z8, I had Nikon Canada come on right after the embargo was lifted talking about the camera, and that got me some notice. And then just a couple of weeks ago, Canon Canada sent me one of their posters for their 50th anniversary that are giving away with the Canon EOS R5, R3, and R6 Mark II purchase. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It really does help this channel grow and get noticed. And for all those minor news stories such as, news stories that aren't quite big enough to have their own separate video, well, I go ahead and tweet those out. So follow me on Twitter. And all sorts of pricing discounts such as what I just talked about, the R5. But we're seeing right now, this summer, actually since Black Friday, everybody except for Sony has some big sales on. Panasonic with the S1H Mark II, $500 off. The R3, $500 off. The R5, $500 off. Various lenses, the Nikon Z6 Mark II, Nikon Z7 Mark II, $400 and $300 off. There's an awful lot of deals, but we are getting ready for a long weekend, both in Canada and the United States. It's Dominion Day, or Canada Day as it's now known. It's a celebration of our national holiday, which is very similar to what the United States celebrates on July 4th, which is their Independence Day. It's a national holiday too. Here in Canada, we didn't separate from the United Kingdom or Britain. We're still, the Queen is still, I'm still stuck in the past. The King is now our head of state, but it's more of a figurehead. Basically, we manage our own laws and everything like that, much like Australia and New Zealand. And probably the reason why we haven't gotten rid of that, completely separating ourselves, is, well, I guess it has to do with history and a tie to the past. But who knows, maybe someday. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. Have a happy Canada Day and Independence Day in Canada and the United States. And for the rest of the world, have yourself a great weekend. Hopefully you have some great weather. We've got a lot of big camera news coming out. The second half of 2023, it's going to be big. And we're not going to slow down in July. Sony has an awful lot of announcements coming, one of them being the A6700, so stick around for that around July the 12th. And then, of course, we're expecting the A7C Mark II, according to Sony Alpha Rumors, and I'm predicting August. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.